This is Basket Case Clubs, CPR Group's podcast where we turn basket case clubs into showcase clubs. Hello everyone and welcome back to Basket Case Clubs. My name is Michael Connolly and it is my pleasure to guide you on today's little journey about, well, basket casey badness. This is a little episode that we thought we'd put together because as I'm recording this, there's a big nasty cyclone bearing down on southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales, and it's not looking like it's going to be much fun. So I'm flying solo today, quite literally, because Steve is in the middle of cyclone preparations. I've said it often that poor Steve, every time he goes camping, there's storms and rain, and I've said a rain dance looks a lot like my brother Steve setting up a tent or a caravan. Anyway, he's moving house at the moment, so if he just goes camping, it's a big storm and lots of rain. If he moves house, it's a freaking cyclone. So thanks, Steve. Not that we're actually going to blame Alfred on you. And I think it's kind of funny because Alfred, for me, Alfred is Batman's butler, and because Alfred is Batman's butler, Alfred is also the name of my robot vacuum cleaner. So now people are saying, oh, where's Alfred? And I'm going, well, he's probably stuck under a couch somewhere. No, I'm talking about the cyclone, not your bloody vacuum cleaner. So this is a good opportunity, though, to remind everyone about this process that we've got when it comes to disasters. And it's a process that a lot of governments and businesses use, and we call it the PPRR framework for disasters. And so it's about what can you do for prevention, what can you do for preparedness, what can you do for response, and then what can you do for recovery. Now, when we're talking about things like cyclones, there's actually not a lot you can do to prevent it. And look, any natural disaster, they're natural disasters, the world's going to win. If Mother Nature wants to knock something down, she's going to find a way to do it. So it's really more a matter, especially when we're talking about sports clubs being prepared for natural disasters, there's a lot of things that you can do to not necessarily stop the thing happening in the first place, but to minimise its impact, which then maximises your ability to get back to business as usual, which is really what we want here. So we were talking about this, we've talked about this when we've been talking about floods, when we've been talking about cyclones up north. But given that we're in the midst of another natural disaster in an Australian summer, it's a good reminder that there's lots of things that we can do. However, the most important thing to do when it comes to natural disasters is look after yourself. And we've seen quite a few times in sports clubs where people have spent too much of their own time getting in and doing things for their clubs, which has put significant impacts on their work life, on their social life, on their family life, on their mental health, on their relationships. And you got to say, well, is it worth it? But when we're talking about natural disasters, it's even more directly, there's an even more direct impact. And that's to people's safety. So I've seen far too many photos of working bees at sports clubs where people are wading through floodwaters up to their armpits and kids swimming in floodwaters and even being at clubs during natural disasters. Now that really worries me because if you think about floodwaters, as soon as a floodwater, just to put this in really simple perspective, if the floodwater is above the opening to the dunnies, then you're swimming through shit. Like it's that simple, and that's gross and dangerous. You got to cut; it could get infected. You put that water in your mouth, you could get sick. So there are some simple things to do that I'd like to talk through that really make it easy to look after yourself, and that's the most important thing about this is to look after yourself. When we've talked about flooding responses previously on Basket Case Clubs, we've also mentioned that people have their own gear at home. So they're going to have potentially their own homes flooded or at risk of flooding. In this case, in northern New South Wales and southeast Queensland, there's the chance that people's own homes are going to be damaged, that access ways are going to be cut off, that supplies are going to be cut off. We might lose water, we might lose power. So what can you do to look after yourself first? Well, firstly, you and your family's safety and health is paramount. So don't worry about the club yet. And right now, as the storm's approaching the coast, it might even be too late to go and put yourself in danger to go and lash things down. That's the sort of prevention or the sort of preparation that should have been done in the first place. The sorts of things when we talk about prevention, though, is it's not necessarily preventing as I said, preventing the cyclone from hitting or preventing the flood from coming. It's about preventing the impact of loss. That's really what you want to be doing, preventing the impact of loss. So is that loss of data, of course, loss of life, loss of health, loss of money, and downtime. How can you use your preparation and good prevention to mean that you can get back up and running as quickly as you can? So let's work through this framework. Now, I know that the PPRR framework itself, every now and again, it comes under a bit of scrutiny to say, well, it's a bit of an oversimplification because every natural disaster is different and your response is going to be different, your preparation is going to be different, the nature of the disaster itself is different. So is it really possible to whittle it down to 4 simple steps? And look, obviously no, but I think that as a high-level approach to how to think about being ready for natural disasters and how to respond to them, not if, but when they arise, then it puts us in a better frame of mind. Now, I say when they arise because we live in Australia. And typically it's northern Australia that's hit by these sorts of storms, so cyclones and pretty damaging tropical lows. But even down south, so kind of across the middle, we have significant flooding in a lot of places. So Gympie, I think, is the flooding capital of Australia. So there's the way that the river systems converge, and the way that the town just is topographically means that it's subjected to flooding. But we also have bushfires. So at this time of year, we've already seen some pretty gnarly bushfires ripping through parts of the south of the country. And when you look at where we build sports facilities, we typically build our sports facilities in places where we don't want to live and we don't want to shop and we don't want to eat and we don't want to work. So it's floodplains and tips, old dump sites. So when you take that into consideration, we can expect our sporting facilities to be impacted by natural disasters, probably even more than our homes, our shops, and our places of business. So taking that into consideration, we go, okay, well, what can we do now? So if we go right back to the beginning, and obviously it's too late for this as the storm's bearing down on us, but as we build facilities now, we're taking a much better approach to the way that we build them. For flood prevention, for instance, we're raising things up as much as we can. Given that if you fill in a floodplain, then floodwater is going to have to go somewhere else and it can just push it into somebody's house or somebody's business. Often what we're seeing is clubhouses now being built where they're accessible by stairs and ramps, but floodwater can go straight underneath them. So it's not creating an impermeable space where water can't go. So that's the sort of design that we're seeing, which, again, floodwaters can go up. And one of the fascinating things about these stupid brains that we have in our heads as humans is that we think that we go back to 1899 was the highest flood we've ever seen. I think that's about when it was for... what's the name of the river? The river that runs through Launceston in Tasmania. That's the highest flood we've ever had. So when we built bridges across Cataract Gorge, we went, well, let's just make sure that it's a metre above the highest flood we've ever had. And guess what? It wasn't the highest flood that's possible. So we think that because that's the worst that's ever been, that's the worst that's ever going to be. And lo and behold, a couple of decades later, the water comes through, wipes out most of the town, wipes out most of the bridges, and they all had to be rebuilt because it wasn't as high as it could go. And especially considering that now with the significant impacts that we're starting to be able to see from climate change, we don't know how bad it's going to be. We don't know once sea levels rise, if global temperatures continue to go up and if then ice caps melt, sea levels rise, where does the high water mark become there? Because you've got water coming from upstream flowing downstream from floods, but we've also got a higher water level. So places that we thought were safe aren't safe. And you can see this so take the Brisbane floods of 2011 and then again in 2022, we can already see some differences. Okay, they're different. The rains fell in different places, but we're still seeing differences in the way that the world is working. So when we're building in the first place and we're trying to prevent the impacts of natural disasters, we need to take all of that sort of stuff into account. Even simple things like when we rebuild our field lighting systems, make sure that the control gear is above the high water mark. Now, that's not a particularly difficult thing to do, but it's an expensive thing to do because it means moving things. But a little bit of investment now at the time of rebuilding or building in the first place means that we don't have to keep doing it again and again and again. My Uncle Joe's a farmer, always used to say a poor man pays twice. Now, that means that Joe, like all of us, has been through that phase of buying the cheap, shitty thing, the cheap, shitty angle grinder, and then it burns out and you go, well, now I'll buy the good one. And then you buy the good one and the good one lasts. So what happened is we tried to save a bit of money and then we had to re-spend. And we see exactly the same thing happening with community infrastructure. We're trying to save a bit of money because we're doing it on the cheap, rather than taking a big step back and going to the fundamental principle of basket case clubs, which is run a good business in the first place. So you've got enough money to spend well first time. Because if you're spending well first time, then you've got the ability to, you've got the right stuff the first time, and you've got the ability for that stuff to be able to help you. So that's good assets, good facilities, good equipment. So yes, make sure that you're investing enough in the first place. What else can prevention do? So really prevention is, as I said, about reducing the risks, not reducing the likelihood that something's going to happen. So it's reducing the impact but not the likelihood of a natural disaster occurring. And it's these some very small things, like just changing the place where we're putting the control gear. Okay, yes, like I said, it's a bit more expensive, but it's going to have a significant impact on reducing the how bad the disaster ends up being for us, because we're doing what we can. So some other simple things to do, and again, this is in the lead up to where we are now. So what I'm hoping that most people have done is check their insurances, making sure that the sorts of storms that are likely to occur where we are, so in this case, strong wind, tropical low, or indeed a cyclone, that any damage that's caused by that is going to be covered by insurance. When we are taking out insurance, again, if you save a bit of money by reducing what's covered, then are you actually putting yourself in the best position for recovery? It's all about risk. So risk is not going to happen. There's just a chance that it's going to happen. What insurance does is it covers your losses if you pay for it. Insurance companies aren't here to look after us. Insurance companies are here to make money. So it's all about and they've got very clever mathematicians called actuarians who can do the calculations to work out what's their potential risk and what do they need to be charging us in terms of premium and in terms of excess, and then what do they need to exclude in our particular schedules to make sure that they're going to make money at the end of the line, not that we're going to be well covered. That generally speaking, playing a statistical game, they're going to make money, but for us, we need to make sure that we're paying enough so that should we need to claim, we can claim because we've got the insurance that's going to cover us. Some other things that you can do is making sure that when you are putting things away, that they're going away in the right place and they're going away well. So some of the things that are potentially going to be dangerous in a storm are bits of outdoor furniture or equipment that's not secured properly. So if there's a place for goalposts when they come out of the ground, make sure that they go there and they're not just lying somewhere where floodwaters could move them and they could cause further damage. And look, another thing, and this goes back to the poor man paying twice syndrome, is that when we build things for clubs, often we try and save a bit of money. So unfortunately, there are going to be things like crappy garden sheds that were not built properly in the first place that are going to become airborne debris in a cyclone. We've also got lean-tos that weren't ever properly approved, maybe no permission from council to put it in the first place. And now it's going to fly off and potentially damage the building. So if roof works weren't done properly, and that may simply be because we tried to save a bit of money, and instead of having a qualified tradesperson come in and do it, we had volunteers do it. Now, notwithstanding that that's risking people's safety and lives by putting volunteers up on roofs when they're not approved or when they're not qualified and not trained to be working at heights like that, it also means that there's a chance that the work they're doing isn't going to be done well enough. So again, just have a really good business model for all of your clubs, for your club and for any other club that, for all of our listeners who work for councils, for instance. Make sure that the business models are sound so that we're not having this poor asset management and asset development approach in the first place. When you are making sure that the facility is safe as well, there are maintenance responsibilities that fall to councils typically as the lessor, and I've realised that sometimes there's subleases in place, or that you might be leasing facilities from a university or some other community organisation, or even commercially. Understand who is responsible for what sort of maintenance. If we've got gutters, for instance, that are always full of leaves, then the water's not going to be able to flow out of those gutters, and it's going to potentially back up, and then that creates a potential collapsing risk, because the mass, the weight of the water sitting on the roof can make the roof collapse, or it can just cause, over time, causing rust from where the screws go through, and then we have roof leaks, and then the ceiling gets damaged, and then it's whatever's under the ceiling, which might be all of the electrical equipment in the canteen, for instance, which all fries. And you might find that sometimes that's not an insurable risk because of maintenance not being done. So it's these little things that happen well ahead of any natural disaster that can make a massive and productive difference. So that's prevention. Again, you're not going to prevent a cyclone coming. Mother Nature's going to throw these things at us, but it is a matter of preventing how bad it is for us. And then we get into preparation. So PPRR. The next one is to make sure that when we're being prepared for natural disasters, again, that we're doing what we can, but keeping it reasonable, because we have to be prepared at home. We've got to be looking after ourselves at home, looking after our safety, looking after our families, looking after our health. But then what can we do at our clubs as well? So what sort of emergency essentials are we going to need? Are we going to need things like first aid kits, torches, portable radios, batteries, power supplies, those sorts of things that in the case of something hitting while we're there, so storms, particularly in the north, can come, well, in summer, storms can come anywhere very, very quickly. And often people can get trapped. So what do we need to do to make sure that should that happen, that we're prepared for the worst in case it does happen while we're there? Another way to be prepared is to simply have a plan. And that plan can be as simple as the mud map. You know, when you're staying in a hotel and you close the door and you can see on the back of the door this emergency evacuation diagram. Your clubhouse should have one of those. But more than having one, you should actually know what it says. So where do we go if we need to take shelter? Where do we go if we need to evacuate from here? So say there's a bushfire coming through and we've got to get out. Where do we go? If there's a gas leak or if there's a fire inside the clubhouse, where do we need to go? It's important not to just have that map, but also to know what it says. But what other sorts of planning do you think you might need? Well, in this case, it's planning to know that if we are here when something happens, then how are people going to behave? So who needs to play what role? Who needs to play a leadership role? So if you think about it from a fire safety perspective, for instance, we'll have an incident controller. So somebody who's in control who will tell other people what to do, and those people need to do it. So what sort of hierarchy do we have in the case of a club? Who needs to say what goes? Because it's sometimes indecision can cause bigger problems than just making a quick decision. Obviously, you need the right information to make a decision. So who's in the best position to know what sort of information they're going to need to be able to make a decision to firstly keep people safe and get people out if we need to. And another great and really important thing to remember when it comes to being prepared is where's our data? So most clubs now are at least using cloud services to some extent. But if you've still got hard copy application forms, insurance forms, incident report forms stored in a filing cabinet somewhere, then that filing cabinet is only as safe as the flood mapping. And we've seen far too many filing cabinets full of irreplaceable information floating down the river as brown mush because it wasn't moved and wasn't digitised at some point. So how do we go about that process? It's very simple for me to say, well, you should have scanned it. And you know, when you get online and you say, right, I've just had a hard disk crash. What do I need to do about it? And you get onto the forums and some idiot says, well, what you need to do is make sure you've backed it up before that happens. God, thanks, that doesn't help me now. That doesn't help me that the bloody filing cabinet's brown mush at the end of the river. What can I do now? Is there a chance to save things? So now's the chance to think about those sorts of things. And I don't want to put clubs into a situation where they're going through 50 years of data to say, well, now we're scanning it and creating files, which is just creating a lot of additional work on the chance that we might need it. Work out what's critical, and that would be going back 5 or 7 years. And I'd go back 7 because, you know, when you look at the legal requirements for keeping information, it's typically 5 or 7. You might choose to go back a bit longer than that, maybe to 10 years. But it doesn't need to be everything. It only needs to be those things that you think are really important. So long as you've got copies of your financial statements, of your annual returns, and of your constitution, but even some of those things are going to be on file elsewhere anyway. So if it's registered with the State or Territory Office of Consumer Affairs, whatever they're called, then there's a copy there anyway. So it's important, but it's not critical. So get what you need, but then just draw a line in the sand and say, if you're not already there, that completely digital, maybe from this date, this is the date that we're going to be fully digital. Anything before that is going to be archived somewhere, and ideally somewhere that isn't in a floodplain, so somewhere in a storage facility somewhere. But you can say from this date, we're going to make sure that we're fully digital. And then, so digitising means making sure your membership database is online, obviously with good data protection and privacy protection policies in place. Financial management is done there. That obviously your banking records, insurance records, all of the documents and data that the club stores. Instead of having them in filing cabinets, let's simply move to working in the cloud. Now, most people are already there, but some of the small clubs aren't, because they're kind of saying, well, we're not that important and we don't have that much stuff and we don't have money to do it anyway. But when you lose everything, those excuses don't really seem very good, because you can't go back in time like the idiot on the forum says, we'll go back in time and back it up. Now, in the PP stage of disaster recovery, the other thing that I'm going to encourage you to do in watching the movement of storms, of cyclones, of floodwaters, of firestorms, is don't get your information from Facebook or Instagram. It's tempting, but when you're looking at Facebook and Instagram, some of the stuff you're going to see there, now this might come as a shock to you, is not going to be true. There are people who just spin shit. They'll put I saw some footage, not on my Facebook account, but somebody showed me some footage the other day. Listen to me, like an old person. Not on my Facebook account, I'm not like that. I saw something on Facebook that was footage of empty shelves in a supermarket and people complaining about how there's nothing available because everything's sold out. Those shelves were in America, and you can clearly see that if you just look that little bit closer, you can see, so somebody's put this together to make people agitated. The best place, I think, to get information is from the official emergency broadcasts. So in this case, all of my updates for the movement of Cyclone Alfred are from the Bureau of Meteorology. I'm just watching the maps there, and that's the place that I'm getting my information. Anything that the media is saying is already coming from there. But some of the things that we've heard the media say, BOM has never said. So BOM hasn't said this is going to turn into a super system, but we're going to get people speculating that it might. Now, of course, it might. But if you're getting your information from the horse's mouth to begin with, then you're avoiding the fear-mongering that happens in the media. Of course, I recognise the irony of me now in the media, albeit a podcast medium, saying avoid the popular media for this sort of stuff. But for me, if you're worried, if you're concerned, and then the best thing to do is to get information from official places. So official places are going to be BOM. There'll be local disaster dashboards, typically that your council will have, and councils are great for things like preparations for floods, because it's councils who have to get involved very heavily in the cleanup. So the more people know, the more people are prepared, the easier the work in the cleanup is for councils. And of course, there's the ABC with the official bulletins that you'll hear on the ABC. So little bit of, I know that there's a little bit of personal bias in this, but I think if you get your information from official sources predominantly or exclusively, especially while things are bad, then you're not going to be over worrying about things that you don't need to be worrying about right now. If there are things that you need to be worrying about, then BOM's going to tell you. ABC Radio is going to tell you. Right, now we get into response and recovery, and these are going to be important in the coming days and weeks for southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales. In response to a natural disaster, if you happen to find yourself in a place where there is an evacuation order, you're best off getting out. However, we've got some great ad campaigns here in Queensland that say things like, if it's flooded, forget it. So if the road or a bridge is flooded and you try and drive through it, there is a chance you will be swept away. Too many people have lost their lives by trying to go through floodwaters in a car. There's the billboard signs that I've seen that say your car can't protect you from floodwaters, and that is absolutely true. Our sister was almost swept away in a car, and it happened far too quickly. She was not aware that so it was just one of those amazing things. Now, she hasn't done things wrong, but floodwaters came and hit her, and she couldn't get out. And because of the electronics in the car, she couldn't even unlock the door, let alone open it against the force of the rising water on the outside, which is a higher pressure system outside the car than inside, which means that you can't force a door open until it's completely underwater and the pressure's neutralised, in which case you also are underwater in a car without scuba gear. So evacuate, but do not go through floodwaters. Also evacuate according to the advice that you're receiving. So there typically comes a point where if you haven't already evacuated, then it's time to hunker down. So it's time to take shelter because it's now unsafe to move. So again, this is why it's really important to stay connected to what the official advice is. If you are trapped in a building, and hopefully you're going to be in a building and not hunkered down under a tree somewhere in a cyclone, they say stay away from windows. Now this is tempting to be near a window because it's fascinating watching trees bend in a way that we don't see them bend all the time. But again, because of the change of pressure inside and outside, windows can smash without warning. And typical house windows aren't safety glass, and exactly the same is true for the sorts of domestic glass that we use in windows in our clubhouses, and you can get very badly cut up. So play it safe and don't be near windows. Obviously, have your emergency supplies ready. The shops have actually been pretty good this time around. And by shops, I mean supermarkets and little local convenience stores. So what sort of emergency supplies is up to you. You know, for me, I kind of like cans of baked beans, so having a few of those around is going to be helpful. If you like, I don't know, eating dog food, then make sure you've got plenty of that around, of course. It leads me to the point of looking after your pets, to know where they are. And if you've got an outside dog, maybe time to bring her, and at least put them in the laundry or the garage. The other thing to do during response is to expect that we're going to lose stuff. So we're probably going to lose comms. Now, whether that's because the communications pits are filling up with water and so then we've got shorts and we can no longer use our internet, no longer use our mobile phones, or whether mobile phone towers come down, or simply because they get blocked because of demand, expect to lose comms, expect to lose power. And it's not necessarily the case that power poles fall over, but trees fall on power lines and bring them down. If there is a fallen power line, stay the hell away, obviously. And you're not necessarily knowing that it's going to still be live, but it can absolutely be live. So stay away from fallen power lines. And there's a chance we're going to lose water as well. And that's kind of funny given that you're going to have lots of it falling from the sky and lots of it rising from the ground. But there's a good chance that we lose water in these sorts of events as well. So that means have some buckets of water, have plenty of water in drinking water in bottles ready to go, at least for a few days, so that if you do get stuck, you've got at least a few days that you can hunker down and stay safe with food and drink before you can get out to get clean water from the shops or whatever it is afterwards. Stay in touch, obviously. Keep listening to the updates so you know when it's safe to go. And keep in mind that no club asset is worth risking your life or the life of another volunteer. So don't put yourself in danger to try and be out in a cyclone lashing something down. By the time a strong wind is here, it's too late. You just need to be looking after yourself at that point. You might also be thinking about what sort of information you can be sharing with members at this point. There's typically nothing new that you need to share, but if you want to stay connected, it's simply a matter of saying, you know, we've done what we can. We are as prepared as we can be, so that your members feel connected. There's, again, no new information, but just communicating that there's no new information is still communicating. And we're people. We like that. We like that people are talking to us because it means people are thinking about us. And when they're thinking about us, we feel heard, we feel valued, we feel part of a community, which is our club. So it's a good idea to at least let people know that you're doing what you can, that you have done what you can, and that you'll keep them posted for when the fields are going to be open again. That then leads into recovery. One of the biggest mistakes we see in recovery is, as I mentioned before, people swimming through poo water to go and clean up the clubhouse too soon, and people entering damaged buildings before council actually gives them the clearance to do so. Now, it might feel bureaucratic. It might feel like an unnecessary restriction because you can look at the building and say, of course it's not going to fall on me. But just take your time. There's no rush, especially if there's a risk that you're going to be hurt or killed. At some point, councils, who are the asset owners, will go and do the levels of inspection that they need to do to make sure that facilities are safe. Then you can get in and do the cleanup. From the outside, you might get there and take lots of photos and videos because this can be really helpful for insurance claim purposes and in support of any future grant applications, because our governments are typically very good at responding to natural disasters because we've had plenty of them. And so they're typically good at providing funding to help us get back on our feet nice and quickly, really because we want active, healthy and engaged communities, and it's our sports clubs that do that. You should also have photos from before the natural disaster hit, so you can then compare what's happened. You might want to make a little log of what damage you're seeing as you're going and doing your first inspection. But don't get into the cleanup too quickly. Make sure that it's safe to do so, because there might still be live power concerns, there might be asbestos concerns, there might simply be germ concerns from overflowing grease traps or toilets that are contaminating the floodwaters. So get approval before you get active. And when you do get active, make sure that anyone who's helping is using appropriate PPE, so personal protective equipment, so gloves, boots, masks, whatever it is that they need. And look, again, I'm going to suggest you spend some money here, but when it comes to things like electrical supplies, your data supplies, your gas supplies, your water supply, get help. Get professional help to be doing this. If you have volunteers who are unqualified, unskilled, and untrained to do this sort of work, again, you're putting people at undue risk of harm. And it might not be right now, but it might be a water failure down the track that leads to additional costs down then, just because it wasn't somebody who actually knew how to do plumbing, a plumber doing that work at the time. And then in the recovery, there's also access to insurance and the grants that can become available. And as I said, both state and territory and Commonwealth government levels of government are usually pretty good at supporting us, because they know that we need this sort of help. To go right back to the very beginning though, the better business that you're running at the outset means that the better your chances of coming through anything like a natural disaster or anything that you're not prepared for, because you've got the means to be able to do so. So to wrap up, safety first. Just safety first. Any club can be rebuilt. Lives can't be replaced. So, and look, even if it doesn't lead to death, the injury that is possible from somebody falling off a roof or getting electrocuted or being hit by something in floodwater, it's not worth the risk. So take your time. Being resilient really comes down to having a great business to start with. So it's not just about when we get in to respond. It's about using also what we learn from this event, from this natural disaster, from whatever it is that goes wrong in any case, so taking Alfred out of it for a moment, whatever it is that goes wrong, as we're recovering, look at what we can be doing now to be preparing for next time, so that we're in a far better place next time. For anyone who is in danger or is in the warning zone, we wish you all the very best, and we hope that everyone is safe and we can come out of this on the other side and get back into sport and our community activities that we love as quickly as possible. If there's anything that we can do at CPR Group to help, and what I'd like to offer here is that we've got some great resources all about disaster resilience. So we've got some resources, some templates and some support, and we can provide those to you all free of charge. We don't want to be making money out of disasters. We want to make sure that if we've got something that can help, you have access to it. So simply contact us via our website, cprgroup.com.au, and you'll see the little contact us. You can email directly to info@cprgroup.com.au, and of course follow us on social media, and you can message us directly there, and we will get things to you as quickly as we can. You may have already seen some of these resources. You may have used something similar before. You can never have too much of this stuff when it's good and it's helpful, and it helps you to think about what we can take from what we're going through right now to deal with it as quickly and as safely as we can, but also to set us up even better for next time, so we can be even stronger and more resilient for whatever comes in the future. Because hey, this is Earth and this is Australia, and it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen again. Thanks very much for joining us. Thanks, of course, to Jess for producing and editing the podcast. If you're not already following us on social media and on our website, please do so to make sure you stay up to date with everything that's going on. And Steve, all the best with the move, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone. Basket Case Clubs acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country on which we record, being Yugambeh, Turrbal, Jagera and Kabi Kabi land. We recognise their enduring connection to land, waters and culture, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to First Nations listeners.